The year was 1957. Martha Henderson stood in her farmhouse kitchen in rural Iowa, staring at 300 glass jars lined up on wooden shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. Outside, winter was coming. Inside, those jars held everything her family of 8 would eat until next summer's harvest. No grocery store, no freezer, no refrigerator that worked when the power went out. Just those jars, and a method her mother taught her that most people today have completely forgotten. What Martha knew, what thousands of farm wives across America knew in the 1950s, wasn't magic. It wasn't even a secret, really. It was survival, and it worked so well that families could store food for years, not months. The question isn't whether it worked. The question is, why did we stop doing it? Let's go back. In the 1950s and early 1960s, rural American families lived differently than we do now. The average farm family had 6 to 8 children. They were miles from the nearest store. Most had electricity, but it was unreliable. Storms knocked out power for days, sometimes weeks. Refrigerators were expensive and small. Freezers were luxuries most couldn't afford. So if you wanted to eat in February, you preserved food in July. Canning wasn't a hobby. It was a seasonal ritual that determined whether your family thrived or went hungry. Every summer, from late June through September, farm wives transformed their kitchens into production lines. Tomatoes, green beans, corn, peaches, apples, beets, pickles, jams, jellies, and even meat. Everything went into jars. A typical farm wife would put up 200 to 400 jars in a single season, not because she was extreme, because that's what it took to feed a family for 12 months. The U.S. Department of Agriculture published canning guides starting in the 1910s. By the 1940s, the Ball Corporation's Blue Book of Canning was in nearly every rural kitchen. These weren't suggestions. They were tested, proven methods developed through decades of trial, error, and sometimes tragedy. Because if you did it wrong, people got sick. If you did it right, your food stayed safe for years. So what was Martha's secret? It wasn't one trick. It was a system. And every single step mattered. First, timing. Martha didn't can food whenever she felt like it. She canned at peak ripeness, the exact moment when fruits and vegetables had maximum natural acidity and sugar content. Tomatoes went into jars within hours of being picked, still warm from the sun. Green beans were snapped, washed, and packed the same morning they came out of the garden. Why? Because fresh food has natural enzymes that start breaking down nutrients and flavor immediately. Every hour you wait, you lose quality. Martha didn't wait. Second, sterilization. Before a single vegetable touched a jar, those jars were boiled, lids were boiled. Even the metal rings were boiled. Martha used a massive canning pot on her wood-burning stove, keeping water at a rolling boil for 10 minutes minimum. This wasn't paranoia. In the 1950s, botulism was a real threat. Clostridium botulinum, the bacteria that causes botulism, thrives in low-acid environments without oxygen, like sealed jars. It's tasteless, odorless, and deadly. Sterilization killed it, every time, without exception. Third, acidity. This is where most modern people get confused. Not all foods can be safely canned the same way. High-acid foods, tomatoes, pickles, fruits, jams, could be processed in a simple boiling water bath. The acid level naturally prevented bacterial growth. But low-acid foods, green beans, corn, meat, carrots, needed pressure canning. Martha had a pressure canner, a heavy contraption that could reach 240 degrees Fahrenheit under 10 to 15 pounds of pressure. That temperature killed even the most stubborn bacterial spores that boiling water couldn't touch. Fourth, the seal. After jars were filled and processed, Martha listened. As the jars cooled on the counter, she'd hear it pop, pop, pop. Each pop meant the lid had vacuum sealed. She'd press the center of each lid with her finger. If it didn't move, it was sealed. If it flexed, she'd reprocess it or eat it that week. A proper seal meant no air, no bacteria, no spoilage. It's the same principle behind modern vacuum-sealed bags, just done with heat and metal lids instead of machines. But here's where Martha did something most people today don't understand. Storage location mattered as much as the canning itself. Those 300 jars didn't sit in her kitchen. They went into the cellar, not a basement, a proper root cellar, dug into the earth on the north side of the house, with thick stone walls and a dirt floor. The temperature stayed between 50 and 60 degrees year-round, cool enough to slow any residual enzyme activity, warm enough that jars wouldn't freeze and crack in winter, dark because light degrades vitamins and color, dry because moisture on lids caused rust and rust broke seals. Martha rotated her stock religiously. New jars went to the back, old jars came to the front. She marked every jar with the date and contents using wax pencil, first in, first out. She knew exactly what she had at any moment. Green beans from July 1956 got used before green beans from July 1957. Nothing sat forgotten in a corner until it was 5 years old, and she inspected. Every single time Martha brought a jar upstairs, she checked it. Was the lid still sealed? Any rust on the ring? Any cloudiness in the liquid? Any off smell when she opened it? If anything looked wrong, the jar went to the pigs. She didn't take chances. Here's what most people don't realize. Properly canned food doesn't just last 1 year. The USDA officially recommends using home canned food within 1 year for peak quality. But that's conservative. In reality, high-acid foods like tomatoes and pickles regularly stayed good for 18 months to 2 years. Low-acid foods like green beans and corn could last 2 to 3 years if processed correctly. Jams and jellies. Some farm wives had jars from 3 or 4 years back that were still perfectly safe, just slightly darker in color. Martha wasn't unusual. My own grandmother, who farmed in Nebraska during this same era, had jars in her cellar from 2 seasons back. She'd bring up peach preserves from 1955 in 1957, open them, and they tasted like summer. Because the science was sound, because the method worked. Now you might be thinking, why didn't they just use freezers? Some did, but freezers had problems that jars didn't. First, freezers require constant electricity. In the 1950s, rural power grids were fragile. A thunderstorm could knock out power for 3 days. If that happened in July, everything in your freezer spoiled. Farm families learned this the hard way. Jars didn't care about power outages. Second, freezers were small. The average 1950s freezer held maybe 10 cubic feet of food. That's nothing for a family of 8 eating 3 meals a day for a year. Martha's cellar held 300 jars plus barrels of apples, potatoes, and onions. Try fitting that in a 1950s freezer. Third, frozen food degraded faster than people expected. Freezer burn, ice crystals, flavor loss after 6 months. Meat turned gray and tasteless after a year. But properly canned beef or chicken, still good 2 years later. The high-heat pressure canning process actually tenderized tough cuts of meat. Some farm wives swore their canned beef tasted better than fresh. Fourth, cost. Running a freezer cost money every month. Canning required an initial investment in jars, lids, and a canner. But after that, just the cost of new lids each year, about a penny each. Jars could be reused for decades. Some of Martha's jars were the same ones her mother used in the 1930s. So if this system worked so well, why did it disappear? 3 things happened between 1960 and 1980 that changed everything. First, supermarkets. In 1950, there were about 15,000 supermarkets in America. By 1970, there were 32,000. Suddenly, even rural families could drive 20 minutes and buy whatever they wanted whenever they wanted it. Canning 300 jars in July started feeling like unnecessary work when you could just buy a can of green beans for 19 cents. Second, freezers got bigger and cheaper. By the late 1960s, chest freezers became affordable for middle-class families. You could store a whole butchered cow in one. The convenience was undeniable. No boiling water, no sterilizing jars, just wrap it and freeze it. Third, and most importantly, mothers stopped teaching daughters. In the 1950s, girls learned to can from their mothers starting around age 10. By age 15, they could process a bushel of tomatoes themselves. But in the 1960s and 70s, daughters were going to college, moving to cities, working office jobs. The knowledge chain broke. Within 1 generation, skills that had been passed down for a century vanished. My own mother, born in 1960, never learned to can. My grandmother stopped canning around 1972 because none of her 4 daughters were interested. She gave away her pressure canner at a garage sale. I found it years later at an antique store, and bought it back for $40. It still works perfectly. Let's talk about those 300 jars honestly. Could a farm wife really keep that many jars of food fresh for 2 years? Technically, yes. Practically, it's more complicated. A family of 8 eating 3 meals a day goes through a lot of food. If you assume 1 jar feeds the family for 1 meal, that's 3 jars per day, or about 90 jars per month. 300 jars would last roughly 3 to 4 months, not 2 years. So how does the math work? It works because Martha wasn't feeding her family exclusively from jars. She had other food sources year-round: fresh eggs from chickens, milk from cows, meat from butchering, root vegetables stored in the cellar, potatoes, carrots, onions, turnips that didn't need canning, dried beans and grains bought in bulk. The jars supplemented this foundation. Also, not all jars were opened at the same rate. Jams and jellies might last 6 months. Pickles were eaten slowly. Some specialty items, like canned chicken or mincemeat for pies, were saved for holidays or special occasions. So yes, some jars from the 1956 canning season might still be unopened in 1958. That's 2 years. That's the truth. And here's the other truth. Farm wives didn't can just once and stop. Martha canned every summer. So in 1957 she had new jars from that summer, leftover jars from 1956, and maybe a few specialty jars from 1955. The cellar was a rotating inventory. The oldest jars were insurance against a bad harvest year, and that insurance was necessary. Here's what we can learn from Martha and thousands of farm wives like her. First, fresh beets frozen for long-term storage. If you process food at its peak and store it correctly, it outlasts anything in a freezer. Modern preppers and homesteaders are rediscovering this, not because they're nostalgic, but because it works. Second, redundancy matters. Martha didn't rely on one preservation method. She canned, she dried, she root cellared, she salted. If one system failed, others backed it up. Today, we rely entirely on refrigeration. When the power goes out, we panic. Third, seasonality isn't a limitation, it's a feature. Martha ate tomatoes in January because she canned them in August. She ate peaches in March because she preserved them in July. Modern grocery stores give us the illusion of abundance, but that abundance depends on trucks, fuel, and global supply chains. Martha's abundance depended on her garden and her skill. Fourth, quality matters more than quantity. Martha didn't can 300 jars of mediocre food. She canned 300 jars of the best produce, picked at peak ripeness, processed immediately. That's why it lasted. That's why it tasted good 2 years later. Martha Henderson passed away in 1994. Her farmhouse was sold. The new owners tore out the root cellar to install a modern basement. They found 17 jars still on the shelves: tomatoes, green beans, and peach preserves from 1989. 5 years old. The couple was afraid to open them. They threw them away. I wish I could have told them. Those jars were probably still safe because Martha knew what she was doing, because the method worked, because for thousands of American families, those jars weren't just food. They were security. They were independence. They were proof that you could take care of your own. Today, less than 2% of Americans can their own food. The average person has maybe 3 days' worth of food in their house. We've traded Martha's 300 jars for DoorDash and same-day grocery delivery. And maybe that's progress. Maybe it's more convenient. But when the power goes out, or the trucks stop running, or the store shelves go empty, and they will eventually, we'll remember what Martha knew. You don't need a secret trick to keep food fresh for years. You need knowledge, discipline, and a respect for the science that our grandmothers understood instinctively. The jars don't lie. The method works. The only question is, are we willing to learn it again?